Okay, so we're here at Cube Corner Show. We have a really fantastic guest today, Marino Wijay. How if you pronounce it. I always say,
Yo, no, it's Marino Wijay. You got it.
there we go, there we go, like DJ, right? So, and Marino's been around the Kubernetes scene for a long time, and has been a CNCF ambassador even. Has done a lot of interesting stuff. Before that, he worked at VMware. He's going to tell us about that. And now he's working at Kong and doing some really exciting, interesting things. So we thought we'd bring him in here. First of all, tell us your background. You're one of these people too who started in virtualization and ended up in Kubernetes, and I think some programming too, perhaps. So tell us, where you came from, where you've been, and what you're up to.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Geoff and Sophia, for having me on board. Exciting show. I actually caught a little bit of one of the previous episodes, and that was, I enjoyed it. A little bit about me, right? So I've dabbled a lot across different domains and different roles. But for me, it all started in ops. Like I was that help desk person that was running around solving trouble tickets and reimaging laptops and desktops and doing all that kind of jazz. But I began to realize that throughout my career, there was something that I really enjoyed doing. It was connectivity, like seeing things connect and work together in unison. And that really drove something home for me with respect to like really embracing network technologies. So we'll go back to about maybe 2005, 6-ish time frame where I really started to get the hang of, how networking was working, what it was doing, and it really all started with wireless networking for me. Way back then, 802.1b or 802.11b was a standard that just came out, and like here I was in my room where I had no internet and we had broadband at home, but I had no way to like get that connection. So I was looking around and I came across this wireless technology and I set it up. Like I went to a store, bought the wireless router and then the adapter, set it up at home, and I was like just blown away at that connectivity. Yeah, it was like very slow, but it still did its thing. And I realized how much of a passion I developed for that kind of technology. So you fast forward to 2008, I was working as an intern, well, co-op, I should say, at Dell, doing desk side support or help desk support as well. And at the time, the supervisor I had was, really pushing me in the direction of learning more networking. Like it wasn't just about plugging in a bunch of things or cables into a switch. It was actually configuring one, right? Understanding subnets and VLANs and routing at a very basic level. And he encouraged me to go dig into the CCNA. Way back then, the CCNA was like one of the most prized networking certifications out there because the Cisco was everywhere, right? Cisco was doing its thing and was creating a discipline of strong network engineers out there that would go out and solve networking problems, design networks at different scales, and here I am, like, really digging into this stuff. So at that same time, like for me, networking was really about building roads. Like, how do these roads connect, and how do you, have the right set of roads in place so you've got a variety of different vehicles running on top of these roads or riding on top of these roads. And it wasn't until I really got into the data center space where I truly understood what was actually going on in this world of networking. So I did end up back at Dell at some point, but this time I was on the implementation side. And I was just like walking into a variety of different data centers, and you would see like racks of like various kinds of hardware and network gear and wires going all over the place, different kinds of connects, like from Ethernet to fiber. And it was just mind blowing, overall to see that. And that really inspired me to go pursue something called the CCIE. So the CCIE is like that expert level network certification that Cisco offered. It was like very highly in demand way back in maybe the early 2010s. Maybe now it's still sought after, but not so much because there are so many other certifications out there. But once I achieved that cert and focused in on the data center and even storage networking, I kind of was trying to figure out what was next. Like I didn't know where to go, what to do. And at that same time, this concept of software-defined networking was really coming about. So I got lucky. I managed to connect with someone that put in a referral for me at VMware. And that was my first, go at working in an SE role, which is a pre-sales engineering style role, where I was working with a variety of end users and customers to just understand the value of software-defined networking. And at that same time, like I already had enough virtual machine and virtualization knowledge that it was really about like manipulating the network with network virtualization as much as you possibly could. So I learned a lot, dug really deep into it, spent some time in other areas as well, like in the world of software-defined WAN or SD-WAN, which was a lot of like, how do you simplify the IPsec conversation and make it automated and abstracted away and allow yourselves to use more than just a T1 circuit. You could use anything if you wanted to connect your locations. And I actually enjoyed that for a bit until I got bored. I got bored because at the same time, like the shiny object syndrome came around because of this thing called Kubernetes. This Kubernetes thing kept popping up all over. Containers were popping up. In fact, when I joined VMware, one of the first conversations I had was about containers and how this technology NSX solves for that container networking problem. And I sat there thinking like, maybe I can ignore this for as long as I possibly could until I couldn't. And it just like kept gnawing away at me. Like it just was like, come on, go learn this, go figure it out. And it wasn't until one day I was at a customer site. We were doing a POC together, and it involved both NSX and Kubernetes. I knew NSX pretty well, but I had like no knowledge of Kubernetes. I knew it was a thing, but while I was there, I was getting asked all of these questions that I had no answers to. And then I don't know why, but I thought like I could, maybe work my way out of a conversation or out of a set of problems. And then I was called out on something. I was called out on being incorrect. And that was my first like inflection point of, okay, I really need to get serious and understand Kubernetes. So the way I tend to learn best is by pursuing certifications. And it just so happened that the Kubernetes ecosystem had something called the Certified Kubernetes Administrator exam out there. So I went after that. I just decided I'm going to go chase after that certification because it's structured. It covers a lot of the key details about how someone would use Kubernetes and operate it and, just lifecycle it all together. So as I was studying this stuff, I was starting to realize like I already did this stuff like way back when I was dealing with VMs in data centers with vSphere, because a lot of those concepts translated very well. Like for example, in Kubernetes, you have networking, storage, compute, like three basic primitives that will exist everywhere. But the way you do this is a little bit more desired state, right? You get a little bit more of the realm, you get into the realms of, I want my system to look like this, always make sure it looks like this. And that made me realize, like, hey, I could probably really develop a career in the world of Kubernetes. So at that same time, like, I got lucky again, where there was a team under the at the time it was called Tanzu. I think it's still kind of called Tanzu now, but it was an amalgamation of Pivotal and Heptio and some of the core services that VMware was offering around containerization. And they had this team that were just solution architects going around, um, either solving containerized problems for end users or doing POCs or doing implementation. So I had the opportunity to spend about a year and a half there. But I usually get kind of antsy when I'm probably about 5 years into a company and I realize like, yeah, I could probably spend a lot of time at VMware and continue that path forward and see where things go. And if you see where things actually went, you kind of realize like maybe it was a good idea that I left at the time I did. So in 2020, 2021 actually, I managed to land at a startup where Initially, I was focusing on service mesh, field engineering work. And then I decided, you know what, like as fun as this is, I probably dive deeper into this ideology of DevRel. So at the same time, the whole DevRel space was starting to really blow up, and in a good way. That everyone wanted to hire a developer advocate or have one, and so I piped up and said, "Hey, I'd be happy to kind of take on this role and go and evangelize what we do, what service mesh is." And I ended up doing that for about a couple of years, 2.5 years. And then last year decided to pivot away from that and focus back into professional services all over again, doing the implementation and design. So I had a bit of a break in between that company and where I'm at right now, Kong. And at Kong, like I'm effectively a service mesh architect. So I'll basically, service mesh architect's probably not the right word to use. I'd probably say API networking architect because everything's an API at the end of the day, and it could be at a micro level, it could be at a macro level. It's just how you design for that network, and it just pulls from everything I've known and learned over the years. I have to know virtualization still. I have to know how containers work. I have to know how cloud works very well in order for me to network my APIs a little bit better. So what I do now is I basically design these different application networks with API gateways in mind, service mesh in mind, and even just a lot of automation, a lot of pipelining, a lot of the extra stuff that you would see, like open telemetry and getting some metrics and logs and tracing information into a system or out of a system so you can discern what's going on, to like using external CAs, to using other authentication systems, to really diving into pipeline automation with tools like Harness and even Argo if you want. And it just made me realize, like, now I'm at this point where I'm just effectively a glorified problem solver. Like, you give me a problem and it's up to me to go figure it out. The way I go about it is using my network knowledge, right? I'll always start with a network, and that's how I figured out Kubernetes. And I'll, solve that problem that way. Like, how do these things connect? How do these things interact? What are some of the conditions by which they can interact, right? And it's funny, when I joined Kong, like almost immediately, I had like a little bit of an onboarding. I had like an onboarding buddy who invited me to some of his calls, and I probably only made like one. I had like a 2 week stint with support where I was kind of understanding how they solve and resolve cases. But probably within my first couple of weeks, the CTO pings me and he's like, "Hey, do you like presenting?" Because I had my DevRel career before. And I'm like, "Yeah, of course I do." And he's like, "Do you want to do the AI keynote demo?" And I'm like, "Hell yeah, of course I will. I'm more than happy to." And he just like said, "All right, go figure this out. Let's review this demo, and we'll get to it, and we'll record it when we get to Sunnyvale." So here I was, like, trying to figure out how like an API gateway at Kong works with this new AI stuff that they launched into it or added to it, as well as like onboarding at the same time while also learning how to do my day job. And I just realized, like, I'm just that kind of person that just has to get into it and just figure it out as I go along. Now, like, it's become a lot more quieter because I focus in with one end user, and they keep me busy. Like, honestly, I probably have 40 hours worth of meetings throughout a
Ooh.
given week. Just that's like on an extreme basis. This week's a little bit lighter. I maybe have like 20 hours worth of meetings. But a lot of that's like, "Hey, how does this work?" Or, "Hey, how should we design for this?" Or, "Can you, let's draw this out on Lucid," or something like that. And, help us understand how this is going to integrate with our APIs and our systems. And it just, goes back to the point of, you got to be a problem solver. You got to be able to communicate and share your thinking. You have to be verbose. When you run the curl dash V, that's like telling you everything. You have to be that in these kinds of roles, because they want to know how you think. They want to know why you made the decisions you made. And at the same time, like, how do you back that up with fact and documentation? And how it's actually supposed to work. So all in all, I say like, yes, I still mess around with Kubernetes here and there, but I'm just, a problem solver.
That's a great. So that is one of the best descriptions I've heard. So well presented, and you know exactly what I'm going to say. You can really see the DevRel, skills there, right? Because when I'm talking, what did you do, Geoff? And I go off in this direction, I go over there, and I kind of wander around. What I really liked was one, your experience with Cisco, because I remember the CCIE. I used to hear they put you in a room somewhere in San Francisco and you'd be left with a bunch of broken switches or something. And so they wouldn't let you out until you'd fixed it. I mean, I don't know if that was true or not. That was the horror story. That's what stopped me from going forward that path. But also, I had to do some Cisco stuff too back in the day. And what people don't understand is the internet was there, but the search engines weren't as good. So you couldn't do what you do now. Okay, quickly Google, Ingress, give me, an AI. So you really had to learn this stuff, especially because a lot of your results you get from search engines would be wrong. I suspected there were people out there doing this on purpose to mess up the lazy people, right? So, oh, there's an answer, and you type in, whole network goes down. So that's a fascinating past. And what's really interesting too, you touched on so many subject we go on forever about Tanzu, for instance, that whole scenario. I know you've got a demo too you want to talk about, but before we go there, I wanted to ask you because everyone's talking about this, and I always like to put people on the spot. So one thing that pops up in my head, because I've now signed up to all the AI thingies, I'm getting the free courses and all this because I'm terrified of becoming redundant or whatever. So I want to hear your prediction. I know it's not easy to predict things, especially today's world, but how dangerous do you think AI is for our jobs? And also, this other question, which I think is important, which worries me, is that companies in trying to gain quick profit will implement it way too quickly, and that the whole security framework has not been properly developed, established, or even understood. So, two-part question there.
Yeah, so the first part of that is like, are we in danger? I mean, at the end of the day, we're always going to be in danger of being replaced by something or someone or some process or some software, right? Like, heck, tomorrow someone can come around and build an AI software architect or solutions architect that can design a billion and one things. But the one thing that AI has trouble replacing that will never be the case is the empathy, right?
Mhm.
The human empathy is so important because yes, end users and customers will present you with a variety of problems. Heck, you could probably throw some of these problems into Chat GPT if you want, or Maestro or whatever you're using. And yeah, an answer will pop up, but is it an empathetic answer? Does it take the approach of, hey, I have a lot of context of what you've been going through, right? Some of the pains you've been going through, some of the challenges you've faced, and how that actually impacts your ability to deliver. Um, how can I, make this easier for you? AI can't do that and will never be able to do that. AI lacks emotion, right? You don't want to be talking to a robot all the time that doesn't really understand how you feel. And maybe like well into the future we'll be at that point where you actually have like full on robots that understand a good level of emotion, but not entirely, right? Especially when the emotions can change so quickly on a moment's notice. But the things to really think about is finding ways to optimize your day job with usage of AI, right? I will be honest, like I use a lot of ChatGPT to help me like, write configs, right? I tell it what I want it to do, so I don't have to go searching on the internet and like piece together things. Like here, you piece this together based off of the context I give you, and then I can test it out and validate that it works. And if it doesn't, we'll go back and forth, right? So it's kind of like an assistant more than anything. And I strongly encourage folks to just consider using it as an assistant first to really help you build, help you design, help you do things like documentation, really mundane tasks, because there's not a lot of creative thinking that AI has. It doesn't think very creatively. If you look at like Dolly or like maybe even Grok and how they spit out images, yes, they're getting very, very realistic in real life, but that's not creativity. It's just pulling from so many sources out there that have been creative for years, for centuries. So you can never replace creativity. You can never replace empathy or emotion, right? These are some things, these are qualities. You can never replace that ability to understand, the ability to read the room, right? You're in a meeting, or you're in let's say, a webinar, or you're in a team meeting for that matter, over like Slack or Zoom or Teams for that matter. And you still have the ability to read the room. Like, you can understand when everyone goes silent because you said something that might be like clashing with their ideologies, right? Or when you say something and not everyone agrees, you can read the room. Well, most people can read the room, but you can't ever have AI do that. Maybe a long, long time from now, it might be possible, but you'll never get close to being a human. And that's where I think a lot of people, suddenly freak out, where they're like, oh, AI is going to replace coders and developers and programmers. Kind of. It's basically, when you are building, when you're developing, you're not writing just code. You're thinking through a problem. You're trying to solve a problem. And you have to really put a lot of thought into it. You have to design it. You have to maybe write it out in let's say, a product and requirements document, or maybe a design doc of sorts. And then you begin to decide, hey, which language should I use? Which is the best tool for the job? Because you're not going to bring a hammer to, a bunch of screws. I mean, sure, you could hammer away at a screw, but it's not going to be as effective, right? Without the right screwdriver. But it really comes back down to this idea of making sure that you can optimize your daily life by using what AI can actually optimize for you, right? Taxes, accounting. It can optimize those little bits and pieces. It's not perfect either, right? Like, I'll sometimes feed numbers into ChatGPT, and it might be like 80% correct, and then it might miss a number, or it might incorrectly add something, or do some weird addition or something of that effect. But when it comes down to it, the entirety of, like, thinking about whether or not it's going to replace you, if you have to fear you don't, you really just have to be able to work with it and find a way to make it work for you and make your life better. Now, the other part to that question, the second part around like AI being jammed into every single technology and system out there, and companies wanting to capitalize off of that. So there's a lot of it going on. I mean, we see it everywhere, in a lot of different systems, a lot of different tools that we use. Classic example, like, you go open Google Docs and all of a sudden Gemini's there, and Gemini's suggesting like a million and one things you can write. Yeah, it could start off an email for you and give you a good structure, but it can't replace you. You still need to provide your personality to that entire conversation. But one of the things that I'm seeing with a lot of companies that have just jammed AI into their tech is them walking back from it because of some of the
Mm,
wide inaccuracies that come about.
interesting.
Like, if you have an AI chatbot, for example, um, maybe you somehow blow up the question by giving it so much context that it cannot comprehend everything. And then all of a sudden it gives you some incorrect answer, or makes you think of it, or look at something in a different way when it really shouldn't have. And that's becoming a problem for a lot of organizations, where they're realizing, like, maybe this isn't the right way to do it. Maybe we actually need to provide real customer service with humans. Now, the other side to that too is the costs that a lot of these companies have to endure
Mm,
by embracing AI, right? Like, it's not just something they can go pull ChatGPT for, or Gemini, or even like Bedrock, and just run with it. I mean, these things cost things. So where does that cost go? It flows down to the consumer at some point. And it's not just, one or two calls we're talking about. We're talking about millions of people that might be consuming this at scale every second of the day. And that tends to blow up your expenses as a company or an organization. So now they fine tune, they refine it a little bit, and they walk back from a lot of their AI strategy and begin to realize maybe we'll only use it for some activities.
mhm.
where we feel like it can be optimizing the way we do our workloads. Maybe it optimizes the way we build code or even like release into production, but it's never going to really truly replace, this one feature that was actually a human behind the scenes, right? So we'll see a little bit about of that like over the next year or two, where a lot of companies walk back from their AI strategies, rethink it, find better ways to make use of these large language models and move forward. I can even tell you that, there's a lot of flooding of the market too,
Hmm.
where a lot of companies are doing the exact same thing and just calling it something else. Like if you think about the IDEs out there, VS Code has Copilot built in. And then you have other IDEs out there or coding tools out there that have their own way of giving you access to models. And then it actually creates a little bit of contention for the developer. Like, which one do I choose? Which one's going to be best for me? And what's best for you is probably always going to be the thing you're most familiar with.
Hmm.
Because at the same time, if you have to stop and then go learn something completely new, you've actually given yourself a bit of a delay or a significant delay, because that learning bit costs something. It costs time. Time is not like infinite. We know that.
Yeah.
And so while AI on one hand is saving us time here, going to have to go relearn something all over again doesn't really save us a lot of time. So that's not to say like, you can't shift from VS Code to like get pieces or cursor or something. I mean, it's always worthwhile testing something out that might maybe benefit you in the way you develop your applications or work with them. But, you know, at the end of the day, it'll come down to companies realizing, damn, we overinvested in this stuff. We need to go back and hire actual humans to go do this stuff for us, because they'll bring the empathy, they'll bring the intelligence, the creativity, the emotions behind what they do. So
Yeah.
yeah.
No, that's perfect. And also I'd say that at the end of the day, humans are the ones still who decide whether or not to buy. And we are in a job of selling whether we like it or not. And so, I'll give you an example. I was on a call the other day with an AI chat box, and I was getting frustrated, and the AI chat box was just all happy as usual. And that got me even more angry, because if it had been a human, they would have sensed me being that way and they would have got frustrated. And I thought, well, at least they're frustrated, so I'm frustrated. But you're dealing with this, piece of plaster basically, with no reaction. It gave me more frustrated. The other thing I'm also going to underline here is this doesn't mean you don't need to learn, because in fact you need to learn even more because of what you said, because we can use these tools, but we have to know what it's doing so we can spot the mistakes, because as it gets better, it'll get better at being wrong, which, I'm not to say I was ever deceptive in school, but when I didn't know something, I could wing it sometimes pretty well, especially in, literature class, whatnot. But in order to understand something's going the wrong direction, you have to understand technology. So this is not going to be us being replaced, especially in that sense. Anyways, my opinion. Anyways, let's get on to what you want to show us. That's, by the way, great conversation. It made me feel a lot more relaxed. I'm not going to cancel my courses though, just in case.
No, you know what? I think it's always good to learn about machine learning, learn about how that feeds into AI, because machine learning came before AI. And at the end of the day, like having that edge is always going to help you, especially when you're looking for your next employer or you're making a career move too. The one thing I will add though is that there's a phenomenon going on with AI agents, right?
Mm,
Building these agents that do something for you, whether they're small and or large, right? And this kind of reminds me of how we just built containers and container images to do stuff for us, right? Or even virtual machine golden images to do things for us, like, hey, I have this Windows Server 2007 or 2008. I can't remember what versions. 2016. 2016 is probably a good candidate here, even though it's 9 years old. So Windows Server 2016, golden image, has all the updates ready to go. We're going to see a lot of that, right? We're going to see a lot of AI agents that are golden images of sorts that do certain things, right? And you'll have to do additional things on top of it, feed it additional context and logic. And someone out there said something, I can't remember who it was. Actually, a few people have said variations of this, of where we'll get to a point where everyone's an entrepreneur, CEO, and just manages a bunch of AI agents. And what's funny about that is, agents are doing something. I mean, I'm an agent, you're an agent. We're doing something. We're actively going through an exercise to get an output of sorts, right? I mean, our way is a little bit more direct and human-like, but these agents are very specific. They cut out the BS and they're on their way. And it's very possible that maybe, 2, 3 years from now, we get to a peak of a bunch of entrepreneurs out there that have like marketplaces of AI agents doing a variety of things. Where I think agents really will help is, when we have integration challenges. Look, it is hard to integrate a lot of the ecosystem in the CNCF. Like, think about Kubernetes and everything surrounding it. It's not like you could just deploy a Helm chart and then everything just works, right? You're going to need some additional logic. We are the logic, we are the glue. And I see that AI agents will fill some of that gap. So, anyways, I want to show you a brief demo
Mm-hmm.
of like some of the stuff like I've been doing with AI and let's say we'll call it APIs even, because if you think about this talk, there is no AI without APIs. AI presents itself as an API at the end of the day. You're still connecting to something. And then behind that, there's like a whole bunch of systems working on behind the scenes doing whatever to be able to give you an output or a result of some sorts. So in the lens of Kong, right? Like I've been at this place for almost 9 months now, and they've been at the forefront of delivering this AI gateway technology, which is here to help you with like guardrails and governance.
Mm-hmm.
Um, to give you an idea, right? You might be using multiple models for development or other kinds of tasks. Maybe you're baking in your models into your code and you just have like some prompt inside of your code that says, go do this, or go get this, or solve this problem for me. And then your LLM will return that value into the code or into your software. And then you actually have your overall output all together based off of what your application does. So Kong has always been known as one of the leaders in the API, as the leader of the, in the API gateway and API management space, or I should really say API platforms. And early last year, early 2024, they came out with this AI gateway technology, which effectively allows you to do a lot of things we do with APIs today: load balance, caching, rate limiting, even. We just take those fundamental technologies and ideologies and apply them to AI. So a good example is maybe I want to use a lot of the local models that I have hosted
Mm-hmm.
locally for like day-to-day tasks, right? But if I have something that requires more intelligence, more reasoning, I'll shoot that request over to OpenAI and then it'll process it. So I shift between, what I'm trying to do locally versus, in the cloud. So I cut back on my costs. Maybe I have 20 developers on my team and then three of them ask the same thing all the time. Why do I need to keep sending those requests to the model when I can maybe cache some of this as well? So let me share my screen. Maybe I'll just share my entire screen. I don't know if that's a good idea. Well, actually, it probably is. I'm just going to close some windows here. Do I have a share button somewhere here?
Should be up near the right. I always lose track of from Zoom and uh,
It's funny because I use Teams a lot, like a lot, a lot. All right. So you should be able to see my screen now, right?
yep.
Okay, cool. Um, by the way, everything that I'm doing here, you can go to the Kong Academy. So
Oh,
just look up Kong Academy on Google or your favorite search engine, and as long as you see this little gorilla thing, you're good to go. I'm not using a lab today only because I was trying to
mhm.
get the lab working, and then all of a sudden I realized something was wrong, and we'll fix it before you even attempt to try this similar lab. But what I'm going to show you, let me hide that. What I'm going to show you is this right here. So what I have going on here, and actually let me just stop sharing for 1 second because I want to clean this up a little bit. Get rid of this window. Get rid of this
I'm writing
window.
down that Kong Academy. You've added to my list of weekends and evenings there.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Let me just hide this. I should have planned this out a little bit better, but that's okay. All right, let's do this again. So here we go. Okay. So I'll show you a few things first, right? The platform I'm looking at right now is called Connect, and you could just go to cloud.konghq.com and set yourself up a Connect account if you want. But Connect is just a SaaS platform that allows you to host all of your APIs and API management as well. What I did here is I've got a gateway called KubeCon Kong AI. KubeCon because I'm going to be delivering this as a full-on workshop. Uh-oh, I lost the monitor. That's okay. No biggie. I'm going to be delivering this as a full-on workshop at KubeCon in London. Not at the actual workshop event, but there's something that Kong's running, and I'm just going to do it there. Anyways, that's why it's called KubeCon Kong AI. Now, what I have here is a control plane, and this lives in Connect, so you never have to worry about deploying a control plane. But what you probably might deploy locally, either in your data center or on your laptop, because this is running on my MacBook right now, is a data plane node. And this is just the actual proxy. So if you're familiar with Nginx, this is basically Nginx that's running with the Kong variant of it, if you want to call it that. So I have it running here. In fact, it's running in Docker. Let me pull it up here, and it's just, a standard container. You can even run it in Kubernetes if you want. There's something called Kong Ingress Controller, which effectively is just our data plane running as a Kubernetes native system. So I went ahead and pre-configured a lot of this. But what I want to show you here is like the way we make this work is we've got a bunch of plugins. So the gateway itself is a pluggable architecture where you add plugins, you enable them as you need features versus having to load everything on at runtime.
Mm-hmm.
You just load in the plugins when you need them. So we have a number here. We have got like this AI proxy advanced caching plugin. We've got a semantic prompt guard. We've got a semantic caching. We've got proxies for these different LLMs. We can round robin. We just have a number of them, right? And if you think about the way you develop, like I'm not going to show you how this actually, maybe I'll show you how some of this is configured. I just don't, actually, you know what? I don't care if you see my key. I'll just go delete it afterwards. Who cares?
I was going
Um,
to type it down, but okay.
oh no, it's actually hidden. That's so
There.
cool. Okay, so they hid it. They must have changed something in Connect. So all we're really doing is in this plugin, we're saying, hey, we want to go to OpenAI. And here's some parameters to understand the instructions that we're going to pass as a developer. And oh, by the way, we need to authenticate with an API key. So that's this right here, which you cannot see right now. But once we authenticate to OpenAI, we make a call and call a cloud-based LLM for it to return a value. Now, there's a number of ways you can test this. Like I can run a simple like for loop that will test this out for me. And in this situation, what I'm doing is I'm actually going to load balance between GPT 3.5 and GPT 4. But to make it a little cleaner, what I did was I actually am running this in some tool called Insomnia. And I'll actually share just the Insomnia screen so we're not having to see the entire full screen here. So in Insomnia, right, like if you're testing out your APIs and you want to see like the kinds of responses you might get, and you're trying to model them a little bit better, maybe you want to set up some stubs, you come in here and you can create a set of collections and a collection that has a bunch of different like curl requests effectively.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I right click this, copy as curl, or I can generate the necessary code that could be Java based, it could be C sharp, it could even be Python down here. And all I'm doing is I'm connecting out to this local data plane that's on my MacBook right now. It's proxying my query, my question, whatever it is, and sending it off to OpenAI for processing. So we'll look at that very first one here. I might pick another one. I don't know. I can't remember if some of the other ones work. But let's just say, I want to know what 1 plus 1 is. Now, here's the actual answer based off of what I sent it, right? 1 plus 1
Mm-hmm.
equals 2. But if you notice here, the model that I'm currently using or that's returning this value is GPT-4. So if I maybe send this again, another model returns. that value,
Interesting.
GPT
Wow.
3.5. Yeah, so I can load balance between multiple models, do a round robin setup or something. Now, let's take a look at another query, right? I'm going to change this to Toronto because
Mhm.
I just want to feel a little Canadian in this call at the moment because we
Yeah.
have Canadians here, right?
Yeah.
Indian restaurants in Toronto. I don't know what it'll respond with, but maybe this might work. This
So it's
might
like a
not work.
postman for AI. Is that what you're saying? It's like,
It is effectively a better version of Postman. It is
wow.
Insomnia. It's an API client for you to model all of that. So it's taking a little bit longer, but if you actually look and see, it gives you a whole bunch of different restaurants in the Toronto area
Beautiful.
um, that's
Hmm.
that's out there. Now, here's the thing. I think this should work. If I run this query again, it should return back very quickly. Okay, it did.
Yeah.
Okay,
Cached. Yeah.
it's cached, right? And how
Hmm.
I know it's
Wow.
cached is because there's a cache hit. So what we do is we use a
Beautiful.
vector database with this
Hmm.
to cache our responses and make it a little bit more cleaner and whatnot.
So it's like a
But
RAG web scraper, right?
basically, yeah, and it's really cool to be able to work with um, and run with as well. Like you could actually do so much with this tool. You can do so much with the way you want to communicate with your LLMs and whatnot. Heck, like I enjoy working with this tool a lot because this can even help you configure your infrastructure too. Like, look, if AWS offers up an API and you know the right curl requests to pass to AWS to be able to configure EKS, for example, that could live here as part of your collections, like your infrastructure collection.
Wow.
But there's so many other things that this system can do. The AI gateway itself can do a lot more. Like it can even um, tell, like, let's say we want to ask a little bit about the history of Kong. I think in one of my plugins, I basically said, sure, you can return values and details about Kong, but you cannot about Jurassic Park, I think. I can't remember. But it'll go back and tell you Kong is a software company specializing in APIs and microservices. And then I have another one right here where who is the director of Jurassic Park? In my prompt guard plugin, I basically said, don't ask questions or don't allow questions about Jurassic Park to be processed.
Mm,
So if I ask it, I
interesting.
get a bad
Wow.
request. And
This is the guardrail portion, basically.
exactly. And what's really cool is like, if I show you my semantic prompt guard here, I'll show you what this looks like. So let me reshare this window quickly and you can take a look. So if you've ever worked with firewalls, which I'm sure like the majority of folks here have, you usually have to specify a rule, source destination, TCP port, UDP port, whatever the hell you want to specify here. This is all I specified. Only allow questions related to Kong, the API company, nothing else. So everything else is invalid, right? So if I wanted to ask about, tell me the history of, let's say, I don't know, AWS sync, maybe it might not return a value. Oh, bad request. Nothing
Hmm.
related to Kong, so it's not going to return values. I'm not saying that y'all should like go out here and block everything or access to all of these other cloud and SaaS-based services, but oh, you're not seeing that. I
No, yeah, I was gonna
apologize.
say, I was gonna, yeah.
I should do that again. Let me do that again so you see how cool this is. So you saw the rule, right?
Hmm.
And I changed the value here, telling me the history about maybe Googling, right?
Hmm.
Send it out, add a request.
Could you try something? Because of course we all talk in security about prompt injection. Could you ask about the King Kong, the movie, and see if it?
History of King Kong. Let's see. Let's see. Actually, this is a good test. Oh no. It might return something about Augie. I don't know. This is not good. So what
My
that tells you is
inner hacker is coming out. There.
so what that tell oh, this is funny. It actually returned something about King Kong only because we didn't give it enough context,
Yeah,
right?
that's what I was going to point out. Yeah, it's not the software. It's that what I've been learning recently is that these tools. This is where you need the human. You need to think, what will smart aleck Geoff try to ask to get around? This is something that computer, because it's really interesting. But what really fascinates me about the product you've talked about is being able to use local LLMs. And then when you don't have the right answer or capacity, you can go out and use under a certain, limit cloud ones. And my question is this. Let's say I'm trying to be very cheap and I'm using free tier everywhere on all sorts of different cloud providers. Would I be able to have them all there and have the load balancer when it gets the answer, no, Geoff, you can only send messages at 5 p.m. It'll go, okay, and I'll switch to, I mean, is that a possibility?
That's a strong possibility. It's entirely possible too, right? All you have to do is when you configure your plugins for your gateway, you can tune it in certain ways so that you can limit how many requests go in a certain direction. So it's also a cost control mechanism.
Yeah.
Like, let's say you set a quota for how many people or how much folks can spend on a particular model. Like, you can spend no more than $1 per month, right? Look, like an actual cost of a query is like less than a penny.
Yeah.
So that gives you about roughly about 100 to 150 queries that you can run through, right? And this is exactly how, OpenAI and ChatGPT do it when you subscribe to their ChatGPT Plus. Like, they give you a limit. They have a gateway of sorts that's trying to understand if you're getting close to your limit. And if you have, well, sorry, you got to wait till next week before you can run those queries again, or next month, or whatever it is. But yeah, there's a lot of things you can do. If you could do it with an API, you can do it with AI.
Yeah. And I worry about that more from the programmatic standpoint. And, you hear the stories of some poor soul who turned on some AWS instances on a Friday and went to the pub for a quick drink and came Monday with a $10,000 bill. But, just a program or these AI agents. Because one of the things, if you might have been watching the news, Jeffrey Hinton, who's from Toronto, he's from Scotland originally, England actually, but he's University of Toronto professor, who's the godfather of IE, was AI, was saying that one of the worries out there is these agents will get this instruction. Okay, this is your task. You need to do it. And the agent will have enough brains and sneaky say, okay, to do this, I need more control. So it's going to start attacking the RBAC. So it'll think it's doing the right thing. It's a very limited, narrow, non-emphatic way of thinking. I've been told to do this task. To do this task, I need more control. I'm going to hack the network to get more control. And so things like these things that Kong has, like limiting gateway, limiting the amount of API requests, limiting costs, are another factor in the security in a way, because they'll stop this from going crazy. Because these AI agents, they don't care. They're not paying the bill, right?
Well, that's just it. Like, all it takes is two things, right? For you to accidentally upload your API key to your Git repo, and then two, your AI agent to have unfettered access to do whatever the heck it wants, right? So you really have to think about how you scope down its capabilities and, just using good hygiene and practices when you're uploading code, right? You don't want to just expose yourself to that situation of a build. Like, here's another example. Like, we use rate limiting not just to prevent denial of service attacks, but to also prevent an auto scaling catastrophe. Imagine you didn't have rate limiting set up, and then all of a sudden you have like a denial of service attack that comes in, which triggers your autoscaler or your HPA, which triggers your node scaler, which now all of a sudden you have an infinite amount of like EKS or GKE nodes that are running. And all of a sudden you have like a $30,000 bill you have to deal with for that month. That's why rate limiting, that's why we have these controls that are put in place. But you're right, we still need someone to figure that out and design for it.
And it is so complicated too that that's where software like what Kong's created, which is great, is needed. Because sure, you get a smart developer can figure something out, but one of the things that I'm always saying is from dealing with a lot of disaster recovery situations is you want to make things simple. And really, even if you're really capable and great, you create a lot of stuff yourself, it's better to hand it over to the experts who do this full time. Because when things go really wrong, you don't want to be sitting there under pressure having to figure them out, in such a big maze. And so that's why I find this really exciting. I'm at the Kong Academy, and I'm going to go through that. And it's
Yeah, I
also a
mean,
continuing tradition of Kubernetes certifications we're giving out for free, which is wonderful. So
yeah, absolutely. Like, everyone go check it out. There's not just AI stuff there. There's also
yeah.
service mesh and if you're a heavy Kubernetes user, you'll understand how to work with like the Kong gateway operator, and as well as like just some other bits and pieces to help you understand. Even that tool I was showing you, Insomnia, right? The API
Mhm.
client that helps you like model your APIs. There's classes and modules there that helps you learn how to use those technologies or use Insomnia a little bit better. I gave you like maybe the surface of it, right? I've just
Wow.
touched it. There's so much more you can do with it.
Is that open source too, the Insomnia?
In Insomnia is, I can't remember. I don't think it's open source. I
Right.
think you can get started with it and trial it out
Right.
for a
Like a free
bit.
tier try, right? I'm
Yeah,
definitely gonna
and
try
then
that.
go ahead.
Yeah, no, and because I have seen everyone starting to move towards AI, as you say, I've seen all sorts of products I've known for a while saying, "Hey, we've got this new AI module." But yeah, I mean, it's you got to work with what you're comfortable with, and but when it comes to networking, I mean, it was complicated enough before Kubernetes, and that's another reason why I have so much respect for Marino, because one of the toughest areas of Kubernetes was the networking. That was just it took me a long time to kind of figure it out, if I ever did. And so that just continues on. So definitely something we want to look at. So does anybody have any questions out there? I know Marina and I can go on forever because this conversation just, it just kind of flows, right? Does anyone have any questions specific and to AI or just to Kong in general? 'Cause the one thing I was asked myself was Kong. It's just not Kubernetes. It's just not AI. It's a whole networking thing, right? Like a service mesh.
It is. I
Yeah,
mean, at the end of the day, in essence, like APIs, service meshes, it's all networking,
yeah,
right? That's all it is. Like at the end of the day, you're still connecting to some sort of port on some
yeah.
IP address.
And then with authentication too, I guess you can, because that's all APIs too. You probably have those same controls in there for that.
Yep.
So yeah, we'll see if there are any questions. Actually, I'm supposed to look at the Q&A. There's chat and there's Q&A,
I didn't
and
even see the QA.
I just thought. Now the thing is that conversations like this, people are so deep thinking that it takes them a while. So if you do have questions later, please contact us. Anything final you want to say? We've gone right up to the hour. It's incredible.
Last thing I'll say is, look, I know AI can be very scary and there could be a lot going on, and you might feel like your job is going to be replaced or something. It's not going to happen that soon. Like it's going to take years and years. But at the same time, the way you can prepare yourself is learn how to work with AI and integrate it into some of your workflows and the way you do certain activities. Remove the monotony of your tasks with AI. Let it, take care of some of the structural documentation for you. Obviously, don't let AI write an entire like book for you, but you know, have it give you some structure or some ideas and, help you proofread if you needed to. Make it your tool. Make it your assistant. That's really all I have for you. And if you need anything, if you want to chat about it a little bit more, or if you have questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to respond to you. And, you can find me on LinkedIn as well. Just look up my name and you'll find it.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, and good luck in London. I'm sure you'll do, fantastically. And thank you very much for showing up, folks. This is one of the most fun sessions I've had because I've learned a lot today, and I knew I would. So please, if you have any questions, send them to it later. Thank you a lot, Marino, and we'll see you in the future, near future, hopefully.
Yep. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Geoff.
Bye bye, folks.